123 days. That is how long it has been since Michael Brown was shot and killed on Schaefer Highway. 123 days since one of Detroit's most recognized, most connected, most publicly beloved entrepreneurs was found dying alone across the street from a bar at 4:30 in the morning. 123 days since a city that spent $27 million building a surveillance network that watches its streets around the clock responded to a priority 1 shooting alert, and then said nothing, not a suspect, not a vehicle, not a face, not a name, nothing. Now I need you to understand something before we go any further. This is not how Detroit handles cases it cares about. In January 2026, 6 weeks before Mike B. was killed, Police Chief Todd Bettison stood at a podium celebrating historic crime numbers and said, "What we're doing in Detroit is working. Crime is going down, 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 and we will double down in 2026. Federal prosecutors were embedded in 7 of the city's precincts. Wayne County prosecutors were embedded in 7 more. The ATF special agent in charge of Detroit said on record, "We're going to hunt you down and you're going to prison." This was the posture of Detroit law enforcement 6 weeks before Mike B. died. And then he died, and 123 days passed. And nobody has been hunted. Nobody has been charged. Nobody has been named. Here is the question that this case has been demanding since day one, and that nobody in an official capacity has answered. Detroit does not go quiet on cases it takes seriously. It goes loud. Press conferences, suspect descriptions, reward announcements, community alerts, facial recognition results. When Detroit law enforcement wants someone found, the machinery moves visibly and fast. When it does not move, when a case as high-profile produces this level of silence for this long, that silence is not an absence of information. It is a decision, and decisions have reasons. Tonight, we are going to talk about the reasons. Before we go any further, subscribe right now. Hit that bell, because Mike B. Brown's 5 children are growing up without their father, while the city that took $27 million of taxpayer money to watch its streets decides what you're allowed to know about who killed him. If that makes you feel something, subscribe. Make this story impossible to bury. And step into what we are about to lay out. Let's start with the data, because the data is where the mask slips. Between 2018 and 2024, less than half of Detroit's homicides resulted in charges. In 2018, the charge rate was 39%. Even in 2024, the city's best year on record, 105 out of 203 murders produced no charges. More than half. Gone. Cold. Buried under case files that families never get updates on. One mother whose son was murdered in Detroit described calling the detective assigned to her son's case and being given an update on the wrong case entirely. She said, "It's more frustrating when you feel they never took it serious in the first place because he was a black male who was found deceased. I just feel like society stereotypes when a young black male gets killed in the city of Detroit." That statement was published in the Detroit News in January 2026, the same month that Chief Bettison was at his podium celebrating historic crime reductions and crediting technology for progress. Now, hold both of those things simultaneously. A city celebrating crime reduction with a 67% clearance rate. A city where more than half of murders between 2018 and 2024 produced no charges. A city where grieving mothers call detectives and get updates on the wrong case. A city where the same police chief who says the technology is working cannot produce a single piece of public output from that technology in the most high-profile murder of 2026. Those two things are not contradictions. They are the same system operating exactly as designed. The clearance rate goes up when cases get closed, and cases get closed for reasons other than justice. Suspects die. Cases get classified without charges. Families stop calling. The numbers look better. The press conferences happen. The contracts get renewed. And on July 1st, 2026, yesterday, Detroit City Council voted 5-4 to renew the ShotSpotter contract for another 9 months. $2.1 million more dollars. The same technology that should have produced investigative leads on the night Mike B. was shot. The same technology that Councilman Denzel McCampbell said produces arrests in only 2 to 3% of alerts and renders aid to victims in less than 1% of cases. The same technology whose contract the Michigan Court of Appeals found was approved in violation of the city's own oversight ordinance. $2.1 million. Renewed. Yesterday. While Mike B.'s case sits at 123 days without a named suspect. That is not irony. That is the price of silence. And in Detroit right now, that price is $2.1 million and climbing. Now, let's talk about what money actually does to a murder investigation in a city with a documented history of institutional corruption, because this is where this case stops being about one man and starts being about a system. On June 2nd, 2026, the FBI unsealed a federal criminal complaint against Michael Norman Anderson, 55, the former strategic sourcing and procurement director of the Detroit Transportation Corporation, the agency that runs the People Mover. Anderson had been pocketing bribes from a Detroit businessman named Terrence Parker, 51, who ran a home restoration company. Parker's company billed the city for IT work it had never performed, never contracted to do, and had no experience or qualifications to deliver. 23 invoices, $304,911, paid out, approved, signed off on, by a man whose entire job was to verify that the work was completed. The FBI found that most of TCR's invoices contain a charge for debris removal, a standard line item for home restoration work, not for IT services. Debris removal on IT invoices, submitted to a transit agency, approved by the procurement director, 23 times. Now I want you to think about what that case tells us about how Detroit's institutional machinery operates when connected people want something. It tells us that contracts go to people who should not have them. It tells us that the person whose job is to protect the public interest can be bought for a few $100,000. It tells us that the documentation of fraud can sit in plain sight, debris removal on IT invoices, and still get paid out 23 times before anyone official notices or acts. And it tells us that when the FBI eventually does act, the case involves subpoenas for communication logs, financial records from 3 fiscal years, and demands for a full independent audit of all active contracts. Now place that documented, federally charged institutional corruption next to what the community has been saying about Mike B. Brown since February 28th, a man who owned property on the most valuable development corridor in Detroit's modern history, a man who reportedly refused to sell when someone wanted what he had, a man who may have known things about deals and people that certain parties needed to remain private, a man who was awarded opportunities that other people wanted, a man who is now dead, with no named suspect, in a city where a procurement director just got federally charged for running a pay-to-play scheme that went on for 2 years before anyone stopped it. In Detroit, institutional corruption is not a theory. It is a federal indictment. And the question this case keeps forcing is whether what happened to Mike B. Brown is connected to the same machinery that handed $300,000 in fraudulent contracts to a restoration company billing for IT work it never did. Here is the part that keeps me up at night, and I think it will do the same to you. Detroit law enforcement went loud and fast on cases it wanted solved in 2025 and 2026. The Nazia Harris case, a 13-year-old girl who disappeared, produced charges against a named suspect, a public identification of the accused, detailed court proceedings, and extensive media coverage all within months of her disappearance. The Ashley Elkins case, a woman who went missing, produced charges against her ex-boyfriend, court appearances, publicly named suspects, ongoing legal proceedings. The Robert Harbin witness murder case, a man shot before he could testify, produced 3 named defendants, a federal press conference, and a prosecutor standing at a podium saying the elimination of a witness is among the most serious crimes imaginable. All of those cases moved. All of them produced public output. All of them had named suspects and court dates and institutional urgency. Mike B. Brown's case has produced nothing. He was not an anonymous victim. He was not a case that went cold because nobody knew who he was or cared enough to investigate. He was known by city officials. He was known by celebrities. He was known by the pastor who testified before city council yesterday about ShotSpotter, the same pastor who eulogized Mike B. at his funeral. He was known by every layer of Detroit's entertainment, business, and civic world. His death was covered by Fox 2, Click on Detroit, rolling out the Detroit Free Press. His restaurants were institutions. His name opened doors. And yet, the same institutional machinery that moved visibly and publicly on every other high-profile case in Detroit in 2026 has produced 123 days of silence on his. A former Detroit homicide detective explained to Detroit News how the department decides which cases get active investigation versus which cases get filed and forgotten. He described a solvability matrix, a formula that determines whether a case has viable leads worth pursuing. Cases that score low on that matrix get moved to the cold case unit. Cases that score high get resources. What determines that score? Witness cooperation, physical evidence, surveillance output. In Mike B.'s case, 2 surviving witnesses who have never been publicly identified. Physical evidence from a shot spotter scene that has never been referenced publicly. Surveillance footage from a commercial corridor that has never been released or described. Every element that should produce a high solvability score exists in this case, and the case is sitting at 123 days without movement. Either the solvability matrix is producing a score that nobody wants to act on, or someone above the matrix is deciding that the score does not matter. In Detroit, a city where a procurement director just signed off on 24 fraudulent invoices because someone told him to, both of those possibilities are worth taking seriously. So here is where this case stands on July 1st, 2026. 123 days since Michael Brown was shot and left dying across the street from Suite 100 Bar and venue on Schaefer Highway. Today, the very day this video was written, Detroit City Council voted to spend $2.1 million more on surveillance technology that should have produced leads in his case. The vote was 5-4. The same technology a court found was approved illegally. The same technology whose own data shows arrests follow only 2 to 3% of alerts. The same technology whose contract was defended by the same pastor who buried Mike B. Brown. $2.1 million renewed. His case unmoved. This week also marks 1 month since the federal court unsealed charges against a Detroit city official who ran a $300,000 pay-to-play contract scheme, proving that in this city, the people whose job is to protect public money and public interest can be bought. That case is moving through federal court. Mike B. Brown's murder case is moving nowhere. Michigan is ranked 6th in the nation for most cold cases. Project Cold Case estimates the state is sitting on approximately 19,000 unsolved homicides between 1980 and 2019. 19,000 families. 19,000 cases where the machinery decided at some point that the solvability score was not high enough, or the complications were too significant, or the silence was easier than the truth. Mike B. Brown's case is 123 days old. It is not a cold case yet, but it is moving in that direction at a pace that has nothing to do with lack of evidence and everything to do with decisions being made by people who are not named in any public statement. Here is what I want you to sit with. In a city where institutional corruption is federally documented and active, in a city where more than half of murders go uncharged, in a city where grieving mothers get updates on the wrong case, in a city that just spent $2.1 million more on surveillance technology while celebrated restaurateur's murder sits untouched, what does it take to make a high-profile case go quiet? What does it cost? Who pays it? And who collects? Mike B. was not a low-level victim who fell through the cracks of an overwhelmed system. He was too known, too connected, too visible for the silence to be accidental. When a man that beloved goes as quiet, as fast in a city with as much institutional machinery, the silence is not a failure. It is a result. And results have architects. So tell me what you think is happening. Tell me what you know that has not made it into any video on this case. Tell me which thread you think needs to be pulled the hardest. Drop it in the comments. Every single one. Because 519 East Jefferson is still unresolved. The killer is still free. And somewhere in Detroit today, while the city council voted to spend $2 more million watching streets that were already watching when Mike B. died, someone who knows exactly what happened on February 28th made the calculation that the silence is still holding. The question is how much longer it holds before someone decides the truth costs less than the secret. Subscribe, share this, stay on this case, because the 3 a.m. Files does not file this way, and neither should you.